It happened on a Wednesday night. One of those nights where you tell yourself you'll just grab one drink after work, maybe two if your coworkers are still feeling it, but definitely home by 10. That was the plan. That was always the plan. But somehow I ended up alone, walking down a side street near 12th and Carson around 11:40 p.m., with my headphones in and my jacket open because I was tipsy and stupid and thought I knew the city well enough not to care. I didn't even see their faces, just felt the shove from behind, hard enough to knock me off balance, and then hands, grabbing, yanking, tearing my bag off my shoulder. Someone slammed me against the wall. I think I said, "What the fuck?" but it didn't come out right. One of them pushed me down. I landed on the sidewalk, hands scraped, phone skidding somewhere into the dark. And then, just like that, they were gone. I was left sitting there, knees up, palms bleeding, my heart pounding in my throat. It took me a second to realize what just happened. A few seconds more to realize I had no way to call anyone. No wallet, no ID, no phone. I felt my throat tighten, and before I knew it, I was crying. Right there, on the curb, like a goddamn cliche. That's how he found me. "Whoa, hey, are you okay?" I looked up, and the streetlight behind him made it hard to see his face at first. Just a silhouette. Tall, lean hoodie under a denim jacket. Then he stepped closer, and I saw him more clearly. It was Theo. We went to the same high school. He was a year above me. We weren't friends exactly, but he used to nod at me in the hallways, or sit behind me in Mr. Haskins' class and kick my chair gently when he was bored. He had this quiet confidence that made people like him, even if they didn't really know him. "Jesus," he said, crouching down. "Evan?" "Yeah," I muttered, wiping at my face with the sleeve of my hoodie. Fuck yeah, it's me. What the hell happened?" "I got mugged." He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me, really looked, like he was trying to figure out what part of me was still intact. Then he took off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. "Come on, let's get you out of here." I don't have my phone or keys. I don't even know." "You don't need any of that right now," he said, his voice steady. "I live 2 blocks away. You can crash there. We'll sort everything out later." Part of me hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't trust myself. I was still shaking, still not totally convinced this wasn't a dream or a breakdown or some weird intersection of both. But when he reached out his hand, I took it. We walked in silence for the first block. I must have looked like hell, limping a little, holding his jacket around me like it was the only thing holding me together. Theo didn't push. He didn't ask for details. He just walked beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. "You still live around here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at me, then nodded. "Yeah, moved back a few months ago. Breakup, new job, you know how it goes." I didn't, but I nodded anyway. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, the kind with creaky steps and weird hallway smells. But it was warm, safe. He unlocked the door and let me inside, flipping on a soft lamp in the corner. "Sit," he said. "I'll get the first aid kit." I sat. The couch was worn but soft, and it smelled like laundry detergent and maybe a little like him. I stared at my hands, at the dried blood on my palms. My head felt too light. When he came back, he crouched in front of me again and started cleaning my hands with a gentleness that caught me off guard. "You don't have to." "I want to," he cut in, not unkindly. I watched him work, the way his brows furrowed when he dabbed at a deeper scrape, the way his fingers steadied mine. And then, finally, I whispered, "Thank you." He looked up. "You don't have to thank me." "I kind of do." He didn't argue, just gave me a soft, crooked smile, the same one I remembered from high school. "You're safe now," he said. "Whatever happened, it's done." But he was wrong about that, because whatever happened on that curb wasn't done. Theo stayed with me through the quiet, the way someone does when they know their presence alone can be enough. He didn't ask a million questions right away. He didn't make me recount every horrifying second on that street corner, and that's what made it bearable. Instead, He just sat with me on the couch, hands working expertly over my scraped knuckles and elbows, while I let the tears come when they needed to. It wasn't just pain or shock anymore. It was humiliation, frustration, and exhaustion, all rolled into one. My shoulders shook, and at one point I whispered, half to myself, "I hate feeling this weak." Theo didn't flinch. He just said, quietly, "You're not weak. This was just a shitty thing that happened. It doesn't define you." And somehow, hearing that, I started to believe him. I had been alone for what felt like hours, mulling over every possible what if and if only, when he appeared. And now he was here, calm, solid, and undeniably alive in a way that contrasted with my trembling state. There was something grounding about him, like he existed outside of the chaos of the city and the randomness of what had just happened. After patching me up, Theo went to the kitchen to grab some water. I followed, still holding my jacket around me like it was armor. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee, the lingering scent of takeout containers stacked in the sink, and something faintly masculine. Cologne? Maybe. I didn't care. For the first time that night, I felt a sliver of normalcy. "You want to call someone? Family? Friend?" he asked, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. His tone was easy, but there was an undercurrent of concern in his dark eyes. He wasn't pushing. He was just there. "I don't have anyone awake to call," I admitted. "And I can't deal with calling my mom right now." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I just said. "All right. You don't have to. You can stay here until tomorrow if you need." I hesitated, suddenly aware of just how exhausted and vulnerable I felt. My throat was raw from crying, my hands sticky from the disinfectant he'd used, and I still smelled like the cold, wet night outside. But the thought of being alone in my tiny apartment, replaying everything over and over, terrified me more than being here with him did. So I nodded, quietly, grateful and a little ashamed that I needed this. Theo smiled softly, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes first. "Good. Sleep on the couch if you want, or there's a blanket on the chair. You'll be safer here than wandering around outside at this hour." I nodded again, fumbling over my words. "Thanks, Theo." He shrugged like it was no big deal, but the warmth in his voice said otherwise. "It's fine, really." I made my way to the couch, keeping my hoodie on and trying not to make a scene. He didn't rush me, didn't hover, but his presence lingered in the room in a way that was distracting. I could feel him across the small living space, moving about quietly, setting a glass of water on the end table, double-checking the small lamp by the couch. Every little motion reminded me that he was here for me, without judgment, without pressure, just him, and that was enough. I tried to sleep, curling into the worn cushions as best I could. But my body wouldn't stop shaking. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the mugging over and over. Every shadow on the wall seemed like a threat. Every distant sound outside the window made my heart jump. And yet, in that chaos, there was him. The faint hum of him moving in the background, the occasional soft clink of glass as he adjusted the water, the warmth that radiated from his steady, calm energy, it anchored me in a way I hadn't expected. At some point, Theo must have noticed I wasn't falling asleep. He came over, gently touching my shoulder. "Hey, you don't have to fight it. Just stay here, safe." I swallowed hard, feeling the lump in my throat again. I'm sorry," I whispered. "I hate that I'm like this." "You're not like this," he said firmly. "This is the world being shitty to you. You didn't do anything wrong." His hand lingered on my shoulder for a beat, longer than necessary. Not in a flirty way, not in a teasing way, just in a grounding, solid, human way. My chest tightened at the closeness, the warmth, the unexpected reassurance. And then he stepped back, giving me space but leaving the feeling behind. Hours passed, and I finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Dreams of the mugging blurred into something softer, calmer, tinted by the presence of Theo's quiet protection. I woke up at dawn, the first pale light stretching across the floor, and he was still there, on the other side of the couch, sitting quietly with a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked up at me, eyes gentle. "Morning. Sleep okay?" I nodded, unsure if I was fully awake or still caught between nightmare and reality. "Better," I admitted. He offered a small, knowing smile. "Good. Eat something. You need to." And in that moment, I realized something. For the first time all night, I felt like I wasn't alone. Not scared, not exposed, not vulnerable. Just seen. The morning light made Theo's apartment look smaller, cozier, warmer. Sunlight spilled through the blinds in streaks, casting everything in soft gold. I blinked a few times, trying to orient myself, still half lost in the haze of sleep and the events of the night. My knees still ached, my hands still stung from the scrapes, but none of that mattered as much as the awareness of Theo's presence. He was sitting on the arm of the couch, sipping coffee, looking every bit calm and controlled. But there was a softness to him now, something I hadn't seen before, something that made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was something else. I wasn't sure yet, and I didn't want to be. Not yet. "You awake?" he asked, voice low, casual, but there was an edge of concern in his tone. "Yeah," I muttered, my voice still scratchy. "Morning." He nodded, setting the coffee mug down on the table. "You're lucky I found you when I did," he said, almost like he was talking to himself. Then he looked at me, eyes sharp, measuring. "That could have gone way worse," I swallowed, not trusting my voice. Yeah, I know." He reached out and gave my shoulder a quick, reassuring squeeze. "You okay to get up?" I nodded, slowly, painfully. Every movement reminded me of the mugging, of the cold asphalt, of the fear that had flooded me. I wrapped Theo's jacket tighter around me, trying to find comfort in the warmth. And maybe, somewhere in the way it smelled faintly like him, I did. "I don't even know what to say," I admitted, letting my voice slip. "I feel like an idiot." "You're not an idiot," he said firmly. "You got mugged. That's not about you being weak or careless. That's life being a dick." I wanted to believe him, and for the first time, maybe I did. There was an honesty in the way he spoke that made it hard not to. I watched him for a moment, memorizing the lines of his face in the morning light, the slope of his jaw, the dark fringe of hair over his forehead, the curve of his lips that seemed soft even when set in seriousness. I caught myself staring too long, and my face heated. He noticed. Maybe he noticed too much. "Hey," he said, voice gentle, pulling me back from wherever I'd drifted. "You're okay now. Let's focus on that." I nodded again. He held me to my feet, and for the first time, standing in his apartment rather than alone on the curb, I felt something close to safe. Not completely healed, not completely okay, but at least I wasn't alone anymore. Theo guided me to the kitchen, where he poured a cup of water for me. "You need to hydrate," he said. "Then we'll figure out what to do about your stuff. The cops, replacements, all that." I took the glass with shaking hands. "Thanks," I whispered. He leaned against the counter, watching me, quiet but present. And in that silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty but charged, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to before. I wanted him to be here. I didn't want the night to end. Not because I needed a ride home, not because I needed help, but because him, Theo, being here made the night feel less broken, less sharp. It was like he put a bandage over more than my scrapes. "Do you want to sit?" he asked, gesturing to the couch. I nodded, settling back into the cushions. He sat beside me, a careful distance away, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that my nerves buzzed in a way I hadn't expected. For a long moment, we just sat there, no words, just breathing and quiet. Then he finally said, "If you want, I can walk you to the station later, file a report. I can help." His tone was careful, almost hesitant, like he wasn't sure if I'd say yes. I think I should," I admitted. I don't even know if I remember exactly what happened. It's fuzzy. He nodded. We'll do it together. You don't have to go alone. And that's when I realized it wasn't just the mugging that had left me raw. It was the loneliness afterward, the fear, the humiliation. And Theo, his presence, his calm, his quiet, steady reassurance was like a balm, something I didn't realize I needed until that exact moment. We didn't touch, not really. Not beyond the occasional brush when he handed me water or adjusted the jacket around my shoulders. But every movement was electric. Every glance lingered. And for the first time, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. I wanted more. I didn't know what more meant, or if he felt it too. But I wanted it, desperately. We eventually left his apartment around mid-morning, the city still half asleep, streets quiet and glistening from an early drizzle. Theo kept a careful arm near mine as we walked, just close enough that I could feel the heat of him, a tether in the chaos that still lingered from the night before. The mugging still clung to me, a heavy, gnawing weight, but with him there, I felt capable of moving through it. He led me to the station first, talking me through everything step by step. He explained what details were important, how to describe the attackers, how to phrase things without getting lost in fear or embarrassment. I felt clumsy, scattered, fumbling for words as memories came in flashes. He didn't rush me. His presence was steady, reassuring. Every so often, he would glance at me with that half smile of his, like he was silently reminding me I wasn't alone in any of it. Filing the report was exhausting, mentally and physically. I hadn't realized how drained I was until I finally sank into a chair in the waiting area, Theo sitting next to me. We didn't speak for a few minutes, just letting the quiet settle, punctuated by the distant murmur of other people and the soft hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. You did really well, he finally said, his hand brushing mine as he moved slightly closer to pass me a bottle of water. Not intentionally intimate, not in a way that screamed, "Look at me," but enough to make my pulse spike. I swallowed hard, nodding, trying to appear composed. "Thanks," I said, voice tight. He gave me a quick nod and leaned back slightly, still watching me. There was an intensity in his gaze that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't judgmental. It wasn't predatory. It was watchful, attentive, like he cared about every micro-reaction I had, and maybe I did too. Afterward, he insisted on walking me back, or rather, escorting me until I felt ready to go alone. The city had come to life a little more, cars driving past, people bustling on sidewalks, but it felt strangely intimate in the moment. Just him and me, navigating a world that had been hostile just hours before, but that suddenly felt less threatening with him near. We paused at a small cafe he recommended, and he got me something to eat. I hardly noticed the warmth of the mug in my hands, the rich smell of coffee, the low hum of conversation around us. All I noticed was him across the table, quiet, patient, just watching as I sipped. He didn't prod, didn't interrogate, he didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to calm me. "You okay?" he asked finally, eyes locking with mine, steady and sincere. Yeah," I said, not entirely sure if it was true, but enough to be honest in the moment. "Better, I guess." Theo smiled softly, leaning back in his chair. It wasn't the same as the crooked, teasing grin from high school. It was gentler, warmer, tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Something like care, or concern, or maybe even more than that. As we left the cafe, he fell into step beside me again, our shoulders brushing every so often. Every time that happened, it sent a jolt through me. I wanted to make it stop, or maybe I didn't. Maybe I wanted it to continue, to linger, to be reminded that I wasn't alone, that someone was paying attention to me in a way that made me feel seen. I realized then that I had been holding myself together all wrong. I hadn't wanted to show weakness to anyone, to admit how scared and helpless I felt. But Theo, he made it okay to be weak. He made it okay to cry, to tremble. to need someone without shame. And maybe that realization was scarier than the mugging itself. When we finally reached the block where my apartment was, I hesitated. I didn't want him to leave. Not yet. "Thanks," I said softly, almost inaudibly. "For what?" he asked, though I knew he knew. "For everything. For finding me. For staying. For making it okay to feel." I trailed off, unsure what words would capture the tangle of gratitude, relief, and something far more complicated inside me. He smiled again, that gentle, steady smile that had anchored me all night and all morning. "Hey," he said, voice low, "anytime. That's what people are for." I nodded, my chest tight, my heart hammering. And then he finally stepped back, just enough to let me open my apartment door, but close enough that I could feel the lingering warmth of his presence. I closed the door behind me, leaned against it, and let out a shaky breath. And for the first time that day, I didn't feel completely alone. That evening, I didn't feel like moving much. My body still ached, my hands were bandaged, and my knees throbbed from where I'd landed on the pavement. Yet there was a part of me that refused to retreat into isolation. I couldn't stop thinking about Theo, about the way he'd stayed with me, about how normal and steady he made everything feel. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from him. Simple. "You doing okay? Coffee?" I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. My mind scrambled, caught between hesitation and relief. Finally, I typed back, "Yeah, coffee sounds good." 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. My heart jumped when I saw him standing there, casual, hoodie pulled up over his head, hair slightly damp from the drizzle outside. But there was that familiar warmth in his expression, the kind of warmth that made your chest tighten in ways you weren't expecting. He stepped inside before I could even ask, carrying 2 steaming cups. "Brought back up," he said, handing one to me. The cup was warm in my hands, the scent of coffee strong and grounding. He leaned against the counter casually, but I could feel the tension radiating from him as well, subtle but present. "Thanks," I murmured. "I wasn't sure I should ask, but I'm glad you came." He gave me a small smile. "You don't have to apologize for needing help. Not to me." We sat at the small kitchen table, sipping coffee in silence for a few moments. He watched me with that same intent gaze, but he didn't push, didn't prod, just sat there, letting me exist, letting me process everything. And that was harder to handle than anything else. I realized I wanted him to notice me, wanted him to stay, wanted him to care. "I feel weird," I admitted finally, voice low. "I hate that I feel like this after everything." Theo leaned back slightly, tilting his head, considering me. "Feel like what?" Like I need someone. Like I want you to be here." My voice caught, almost embarrassing me. I couldn't look at him. I just stared down at the mug in my hands, fumbling with the warmth, clinging to it. Theo didn't say anything at first. He just reached out, letting his fingers brush mine across the cup. A subtle, deliberate contact. Just enough to send a spark through me, enough to make my stomach flip. "Then I'm here," he said quietly. "I don't have anywhere else to be." I felt my chest tighten, a mixture of relief and something else I didn't have words for. I wanted to say more, to explain the way my heart had been racing since he first found me on that curb, but I couldn't. Instead, I nodded, letting him read what I couldn't voice. After a few minutes, he got up to pace a little, stretching, loosening his shoulders. I followed him with my eyes, noticing the way the light caught the line of his jaw, the faint crease at the corner of his eyes, the subtle movement of his hands as he gestured absent-mindedly. Every small thing about him seemed amplified now, every motion intimate in a way that I couldn't ignore. "You don't have to handle everything alone," he said finally, voice low. "Not ever. You let me in tonight. That's enough." I didn't know who else to call," I admitted. "I didn't even think someone like you would care." His eyes softened, and he stepped closer, letting the gap between us shrink just slightly. "Of course I care," he said, a quiet intensity in his tone that made my pulse spike. "I found you out there, scared and alone. You mattered to me before you even knew it." I couldn't speak. I just let the words sink in, let the truth of his presence wash over me. And then, Without thinking, I reached out, letting my hand brush against his. Just a touch, tentative, but it said everything my words couldn't. Theo didn't pull away. He let it linger, fingers intertwined with mine, and that simple act, so easy, so intimate, made my chest ache with something I had no name for. Relief, desire, gratitude, longing, all tangled together in the quiet hum of his presence. I realized in that moment that the mugging, the fear, the tears, none of it had been wasted, because it had brought me here to this point with him. And I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I didn't want to be anywhere else. By the time evening rolled around, the city lights reflected off the wet streets, giving everything a kind of soft, blurred glow. Theo and I had spent the day quietly, me catching up on errands I hadn't been able to handle after the mugging, him keeping me company, occasionally teasing me gently, always keeping a careful distance, but close enough that every glance, every brush of his hand, sent shivers down my spine. We ended up back at his apartment later, not because I wanted to linger there, but because I didn't want to go home yet. I still felt raw, shaken, like the mugging had left invisible bruises across my chest and stomach. Theo noticed. Of course he noticed. "You okay?" he asked as soon as the door closed behind us, setting his keys on the counter. His eyes, calm and dark in the dim light, searched mine, trying to measure just how deep my scars went. "I think so," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's weird. Even now I can't stop thinking about it." He nodded, walking over to sit on the edge of the couch. I stayed standing at first, awkward, unsure, like some invisible barrier had appeared between us. Then, slowly, I joined him. The couch was narrow, and as I sat, our legs brushed. Just a little, but enough to make me tense, enough to make my heart start hammering. "Hey," Theo said softly, reaching over to tap my arm. "It's okay to be nervous. Or scared. Or whatever you're feeling. You don't have to hide it from me." I swallowed hard, caught off guard by his gentle tone. "I'm not good at letting people see me like this," I confessed. "I usually just deal with it alone." "Well, that's not happening tonight," he said, voice low, deliberate, his fingers brushed against mine again, not forcing, not demanding, just lingering. "I'm not going anywhere." The weight of that sentence hit me harder than I expected. I had spent the entire day moving from one distraction to the next, pretending the fear and embarrassment didn't exist. But with Theo, it didn't matter. I could be vulnerable. I could be raw. And he didn't flinch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension in the air was thick but quiet. I noticed the subtle shift in him, the faint relaxation in his shoulders, the way his gaze softened when it met mine. And something inside me, something I hadn't admitted even to myself, stirred. "Can I?" I began, then faltered. "Can I just sit closer?" He gave me that slow, careful smile that made my chest tighten. "Yeah," he whispered. And as I edged closer, our bodies aligned just slightly, the warmth from his side seeping into mine. I froze for a second at the contact, then let it settle, letting the tension of the day melt slightly with it. We didn't speak for a long while, just sat, close enough to feel each other, letting the quiet hum of the apartment fill the spaces between our words. And then, almost imperceptibly, his hand brushed against mine again. This time, I didn't pull away. My fingers intertwined with his, tentative, but willing. The small gesture was electric. It spoke of trust, of safety, of a shared understanding that neither of us had to force or define just yet. My heart hammered in my chest, but it wasn't fear. Not entirely. There was comfort in it, in him, in the subtle intimacy of simply being near someone who cared. I looked up at him, and he returned my gaze, eyes soft but intense, searching for permission I didn't need to give. A slow smile tugged at his lips. "You okay with this?" he asked quietly. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "Yeah," I breathed. "Yeah, I am." For the first time since the mugging, I felt whole, in a strange, fragile way. Not healed, not fixed, but grounded, anchored. And it was all because he was here, because Theo was here. The rest of the evening stretched out in quiet companionship. Theo didn't rush me, didn't try to fill the space with chatter. Instead, he let the world fade away, leaving just the two of us in that small apartment, sitting close enough that the brush of our arms and the occasional graze of our fingers felt electric. I found myself watching him without realizing it, noticing the subtle ways he moved. The slight tilt of his head, the way his shoulders relaxed when he leaned back, the faint shadow of a smile when our eyes met. Every little gesture seemed amplified, intimate, like he was speaking without words. At one point, I couldn't take it anymore. My voice was barely a whisper as I asked, Why did you stay last night? I didn't even know who to call, and I was such a mess." Theo's gaze softened, the intensity of his eyes melting into something warmer. "Because you needed someone," he said simply, "and because I wanted to be that someone. No one deserves to be left like that." The honesty in his words hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened, and I could feel my throat working to hold back another wave of tears, not of fear this time, but of gratitude, relief, and something I couldn't name. I wanted to say more, to tell him how much it meant that he'd been there, but my words felt too clumsy, too weak. Instead, I just leaned closer, letting my shoulder brush against his. He didn't move away. If anything, he inched a fraction closer, the warmth of his side pressing against mine, subtle but undeniable. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest with each breath, and it was grounding, soothing, intoxicating. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered, almost to himself. "Just stay." And so I did. We sat in silence for a while, letting the closeness settle, letting the tension of the mugging and the fear of the night dissolve in the warmth of each other's presence. There was something unspoken in that quiet intimacy, a bond forming that didn't require labels, declarations, or pressure. At one point, Theo's hand brushed mine again, slower this time, more deliberate. I didn't pull away. I let our fingers intertwine, holding on, letting the small, tender touch speak the words I couldn't find. His thumb traced the back of my hand gently, and I felt a shiver run through me, not from the cold, but from the quiet, electric closeness between us. "I've never done this before," I admitted, voice low, almost trembling. Being like this with someone, feeling safe after something terrible. He finished for me, eyes softening. "I know. And it's okay. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Not with me." Something broke inside me then, not in a bad way, but in a release I hadn't realized I needed. The fear, the panic, the helplessness, it all let go, leaving a raw, vulnerable honesty in its place. And he was there, still steady, still Theo. I turned slightly to face him, and our eyes met. The moment was delicate, electric, full of unspoken desire and understanding. I wanted to say everything, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I let the tension linger, letting him see, really see, how much his presence meant to me. He leaned just a fraction closer, careful, deliberate, giving me the choice, giving me the control. My heart raced, my chest tightened, and I realized that in that simple, unhurried movement, he had bridged the space between fear and comfort, between distance and connection. We stayed like that for a long time, just inches apart, the room filled with warmth, quiet, and the subtle hum of shared intimacy. And I knew, deep down, that whatever came next, this night, this closeness, this trust, would mark something irreversible. Something that had begun on a curb, in fear and tears, and had grown into something far more complicated, far more real. Theo finally broke the silence, voice low, gentle. "You're safe, and I'm not going anywhere." I let out a shaky breath, leaning into him slightly. I know, and thank you." No words beyond that were necessary. Not yet. The night had settled fully by the time we returned to Theo's apartment. The city outside was quiet, the distant hum of traffic soft, almost like a lullaby. We didn't speak much on the way back. Words felt unnecessary. The silence itself carried more meaning than any conversation could. Once inside, I sank onto the couch again, exhausted, emotionally raw, but oddly calm. Theo sat beside me, just close enough that our legs brushed occasionally. Each touch, each shared space was a tether, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Not really. Not anymore. "You want to talk about it?" he asked finally, voice gentle. I shook my head. "Not really. I just want to be here, with you." He didn't move away. He didn't hesitate. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, letting his shoulder rest just against mine. Warmth radiated from him in a way that made the world outside fade. And for the first time since the mugging, I allowed myself to relax completely. Minutes passed in quiet companionship, punctuated only by the faint creak of the apartment settling. My breathing slowed, my heartbeat steadied, and I felt something I hadn't in hours. Safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally. Grounded. Anchored. Then, almost instinctively, I turned to him. Our eyes met, and there was an unspoken understanding between us. No words were needed. The intensity of the past day, the fear, the vulnerability, the comfort he had offered, culminated in that silent moment. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from my forehead, fingers lingering on my cheek. The touch was tentative but deliberate, intimate yet respectful. I leaned slightly into him, letting the closeness settle, feeling a rush of warmth through my chest. "I've never felt this, cared for," I admitted softly, voice barely audible. Theo's hand stayed on my cheek, thumb grazing gently. "You deserve it," he whispered. "You deserve to be safe and seen and held, if that's okay." I nodded, swallowing hard. "It is." I breathed, and that was enough. The tension, the fear, the adrenaline, they melted into something else. Connection, trust, intimacy built not on lust alone, but on shared vulnerability and care. I could feel my heart slow, my body relax, and a quiet certainty settle in. I wasn't alone anymore. Theo leaned closer, our foreheads almost touching, and I could feel the steady, calming rhythm of his breath against mine. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't frantic. It was deliberate, patient, grounding. I realized then that I trusted him completely. And that trust, fragile and new, was powerful. Eventually, he pulled back just slightly, enough to meet my gaze. "Sleep if you want. I'll be here," he said softly. I smiled, letting out a quiet, tired laugh. "Yeah, I think I will." He stayed, sitting beside me as I drifted off, his presence a quiet shield against the fear of the world. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept, not just physically, but emotionally. I slept feeling seen, feeling protected, feeling connected. When morning came, I woke to the soft light spilling across the couch, Theo still there beside me. No words were necessary. The night, the mugging, the fear, the tears, all of it had brought us here, and I knew as I looked at him that whatever came next, we'd face it together. Because sometimes, the world breaks you in ways you can't predict. And sometimes, someone shows up, unexpected, steady, and unwavering, and in that moment, everything begins to heal.